So being a mechanic for a professional athlete, you were like the last person that you're at. The last words, other than what an athlete might say to themselves, are coming from you. And so I think what's really fascinating is how much power and influence your words, your vibe, your energy has over the athlete you work with. I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you manage that.
So yeah, being a motocross mechanic, we are the last people to speak to our guys before the gate drops, right? So I mean, the team's trying to relay messages down to me, but at the end of the day, it's what I say to Nate. So my biggest thing is just trying to make sure that he's calm, he's confident. Like I'm not one of those yelling, screaming guys. I know there are dudes that are, but it's just trying to keep Nate confident, keep him calm, and get him out there to do what he knows how to do.
I love it. So, guys, we're here with Christian Kauffman. He is a mechanic for Starr Racing Yamaha. He is the mechanic for a professional athlete by the name of Nate Thrasher, who competes in professional supercross and motocross. So, tell me a little bit more about how the relationship forms. Because for me, if I know how valuable, let's say I'm a professional athlete, and I know how valuable it is to not just have someone who can do the mechanical piece, but I need someone that aligns with my vibe. If I'm a high energy, fun loving guy, which I'd like to think I am, there's a certain type of personality I tend to jive with. But then, you might have an athlete, maybe like a Cooper Webb or someone that's maybe a little bit different where the personalities have to match. How did that whole relationship, and not just with Nate, your current athlete, but maybe walk me through a little bit of maybe some past? 'Cause I know you worked with Ramy, just some of the athletes you work with. What makes a great relationship with a mechanic and a racer, and where do the challenges come in, and how does this whole dynamic form?
So honestly, the relationship most of the time is just something that kind of gets paired up either by random or by choice, or you know the families or something, or sometimes they're friends. But most of mine have actually been just I signed with a team and that was who I was assigned to. Like I signed with Star Racing Yamaha at the end of 2021, and basically they told me like, "Hey, you're gonna be Nate's mechanic," and it's really sometimes it's super hard. Like Nate had had the same mechanic his entire career up until me, so the really hard challenge with working with Nate is just realizing that that relationship is going to take a huge amount of time. And sometimes it vibes and sometimes it doesn't. Luckily, with Nate and I, we vibe. I try to be more of like just a calm, confident, reassuring person, and he seems to respond to that. But I mean, I've had relationships with riders in the past where it doesn't work for whatever reason. Like you have those guys that are super high on energy, and then you have some riders that, they've spent their whole life getting yelled at by their dad, so then that's what they expect from a mechanic. And it's hard, like, because I'm not that guy. So luckily, Nate and I work together, but sometimes it just doesn't.
That's wild. Yeah, and it's so true. And I hate to pick on Moto. Well, actually, that's not true. I love to pick on Moto. In Moto, you do see a lot of Moto dads. It's amazing. When I used to post um, before my former Instagram account got banned, when I was posting and getting like a lot more engagement, and I was in the algorithm, and I was surfing that wave of getting in front of the right people. What was interesting is that the posts that got the most engagement were ones about moto dads and moto moms. And for those of you that don't know what a moto dad or moto mom is, how would you, what's your definition, Christian?
My definition would be just imagine like the craziest normal sport stick and ball mom or normal stick and ball sport dad that's like always yelling at the game or like screaming at coaches. Just imagine that, but there's 40 of them on a gate at an amateur supercross or motocross race. Like these people are gnarly. They put their whole lives in it and it's super financially taxing. So I get it. Like they're hard on their kids if nothing else.
Oh, for sure. And so without naming names, I mean, put it this way. We know for a fact you're in a team where there's a lot of success, but there's also a lot of competition. Without having to call anyone out, what do you see as the common link between those that succeed and maybe even those that are challenged and don't succeed and maybe struggle a little bit more than the others? Do you start to see a consistent theme among those that do well and those that are challenged?
As far as seeing a theme on our team is that we have a pretty good spectrum of families, but I know the ones that tend to succeed a little bit are the parents that are supportive of their kids. Like, a lot of them still have hard relationships with their parents, but at the any given race weekend, we still have every rider's family there, whether it's wives, girlfriends, whatever. So it's just super dependent on what kind of situation they're going to succeed in, right? So Nate has really good success with people that are supportive and that kind of stuff, and I think that kind of goes across the industry. You look at someone like, um, Cooper Webb. He kind of had a tough time, but a lot of people just, whether they need their family there or whether they need time away from their family, it just is hard, and you can't really put a finger on it because there's so many different kinds. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, what's interesting is you had said that you have a girlfriend, and I know that your travel schedule has got to be, I mean, it's literally insane. I mean, what, you fly back on a Monday, Sunday, and then you're flying back out what, on a Thursday night. So, you're gone all the time. How so you're in a relationship, you've got, obviously parents, family, what have you. How do you manage a relationship, family? Then you also have an athlete that's kind of like you're their right arm. And so now you have to not just manage them, but I'm assuming they're very engaged and dependent on the relationship they have with their family. So there's just like a lot of relationships, it seems, that have to be managed. How do you manage your own relationships? And then how does that look when you start to merge your family, maybe you and your girlfriend? Like, for example, I can't imagine, like, let's say you're Nate's girlfriend, assuming he's got a girlfriend, what have you. Maybe she doesn't vibe with your girlfriend, then that's a different dynamic. There's so many opportunities for things to be challenged. How do you manage that yourself?
For me personally, it's a big thing of just trying to make the time available for all those kinds of people. So we do travel extremely grueling, like it's an extremely grueling schedule. Like, I'm gonna fly out on a 6 a.m. flight Thursday morning to go to Indianapolis, and then I won't get back until midday or Monday afternoon. So it's super hard, but at the time you have to make time for these things, right? So it's really important for me to make time for my girlfriend and for me to make time so I can call my parents and kind of keep that relationship going, because the truth of the matter is like, Nate and I don't necessarily hang out too much away from the track, but that's how him and I succeed because we're in each other's business, 5 days a week. Like, I see him more than I see my girlfriend, more than I see my parents, more than really I see the majority of my friends. So I think for me, it's super important that I make time and I put effort into those things. But those people are also very respectful and supportive of like my job. They're supportive of the time that I need for my job. They're supportive of like my schedule. So I think it just goes back to, you just have to be supportive. Like, if you're selfish, it doesn't tend to work really well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because you were also saying, as a complete side note, because before we started this call, we were talking, I thought it was hilarious. Totally off subject, but related to you and your girlfriend. You have a mullet currently. You
Hmm.
considered chopping it off. Tell me if I'm wrong. And the girlfriend paused it. She shut that operation down. The cutoff is not happening. Walk me through this whole mullet situation. Is this like a moto thing? Is this, I assume you live in probably what, Tallahassee or nearby,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you live
So
in
now,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
So you live, you live in Tallahassee. Girlfriend says no to cutting off the mullet. Is it coming back? Because in an odd way, I'm struggling and conflict with the fact that I see it on some guys done right, and it actually doesn't look that bad. I'm embarrassed to say it, but tell me how that works with you now.
For me, honestly, like, it just started with like the COVID lockdown. I wasn't getting a haircut, so I had like longer hair, and I would just push it back underneath my hat. And one day, my rider at the time, he's like, "Dude, what are you, like, growing a mullet or something?" And I was like, "Not really," but the idea stuck in my head. So then, like, the next year we were going to outdoors, and I was like, "I'm just gonna get a mullet because it was in at the time, and I just thought it was funny." And like, I think it's a pretty moto haircut, so, like, in the 90s. So I grew a mullet out and uh, got it cut in, and ever since I've had it, like, I've just, like, my girlfriend has always like I always catch her playing with my hair and that kind of stuff. So it's just funny now. If I do say I'm gonna chop it off, there's like it's not even an option. Like I've sent her Snapchats and sent her pictures of me with my hair like pulled back or tucked up behind the back of my neck, and she's like, "There's no way you actually cut your mullet. Like I wouldn't even know what you look like." I'm just like, ah. It's just funny for me.
Oh my God, I love it. Uh, so when it comes to your team, so for those people that are listening that aren't familiar, just a quick background. Um, you yourself, Christian, and the athletes you work with, we're talking motocross, we're talking supercross. So we're talking dirt bikes, jumps, motocross is outside, supercross is indoors and stadiums. Um, you are on a team that has had, there's certain teams in our world that have dominated, and for years it was, pro circuit Kawasaki. Then we are in a phase right now where it seems to be Star Racing Yamaha. I think the most important question that many people have, or the most common question people have, is, why is it? I mean, I I don't like when people give too much credit to the equipment, because I don't know if I agree that that's always the differentiator. And not to say that the equipment you're not on is not high level, it certainly is. But I always think that it's more the dynamic of the management, the team, the personalities, the vibe. That's my opinion. Give me a little bit of an idea as to what you think makes you and your team so successful.
So my relationship with Starr has been for the past 2 years. So when I got here, it was we like Bobby sat all of us new mechanics down in a meeting and he said, "Look, this is Star Racing Yamaha. Like you guys are here to win, and we don't put up with mistakes. We don't put up with any sort of drama. Like we're here to do our job and we're here to leave." So like just I think that that being the vibe is like, look, guys, we're here to win and we have the equipment that's shown to win. We're willing to try stuff outside the box. Like we do a lot and do whatever it takes to win. So it's like I hate to say it, but in the vibe around the team is like winning over everything, like team over everything. Like, you know, if your rider has a bad race, but the other two guys on the land on the podium, you don't get to go back to the truck and mope. It's like you get to go celebrate with the two dudes that just got on the podium. Like we succeed and we die as a team. Like, so to have such a big team and to have just the overwhelming sense of like the dude next to you, the dude working underneath the truck next to you has your back is good. And I think it's super necessary if we want to keep the success that we've had.
Yeah, I love that, because there's some days where you're just not on. I mean, we know that a lot of times there's days where, hey, you're just not feeling the track, or your athlete's not dialed, and hey, maybe a fifth isn't what we want, but if we're chasing a championship, maybe fifth is actually our best as opposed to a 10th, 12th, 15th. Um, Circling back to your relationship with the team, what is it you feel that you offer? Like, what's the one thing that you're proud of that you bring to the team? Because obviously that's what makes a team great. If you have all alphas, all betas, all introverts, all extroverts, it doesn't work. There needs to be a mix where everyone in the tribe kind of has, the medicine man, you have the hunters, the gatherers. That to me is what makes an effective tribe. What do you feel you're most proud of for contributing to your tribe?
So what I'm proud of is I came into Star Racing last year, or at the end of 2021, with really no results to my resume. You know what I mean? Like I had been with those privateer guys and those touted amateurs, whether it was practice guy or race guy. So I had put the work in, but as far as my riders on track results, there wasn't too much to hang my hat on. But in myself, I knew that that meant that I had to come here, I had to learn, I had to listen. I'm not the best mechanic in the world, but these guys here have won just about everything there is to win. So just put my head down and listen and work hard. Like, so listening to whether it's Brad, who's our team principal, or listening to Trevor, who's our engine guy, or trusting our suspension techs, like my job is to build my motorcycle. My job is to do everything I can for Nate. But at the same time, I have to understand that those guys are doing everything they can for the team. So falling in line there is really good and really important. Like understanding and trusting the guys around me is super important. And honestly, like in my first year with the team, Nate won the East-West shootout in Salt Lake. So to win my first Supercross in my first year with Star Racing was like unreal. And ever since then, it's just been a constant strive to, back that up, right? Have, leading laps in motos and outdoors and winning Supercross this year. It's like, it's super important. And I'm happy that I see myself rising to that level to where, I can provide Nate with a, podium, if not winning bike every weekend. Like, those guys trusted me and I trusted them, and that just makes it so much better when you're able to just work as a well-oiled machine, and those guys don't have to check in on me every 5 minutes or like double check my stuff. I still ask them to, like just because I try not to be a proud person, like I try to be humble and realize, everyone makes mistakes, and I think that's important. Like if you have mechanics that never admit to a mistake, then you'll never get to the bottom of a problem.
Oh, it's so true. And and it's funny because it's hard, right? I mean, it's hard to say I screwed up because your ego is being challenged, and but if you really think about it, it's you see this in especially with athletes like Chase Sexton who races the class that's called the 450 class as opposed to your class the 250, and you see mistakes happen and sometimes you see another mistake happen, and so this ability to manage mistakes, especially I work with a pro golfer, so I'm a mental performance coach, and the pro golfer I work with, I mean, it's a game of misses, and you start to pay attention to things and you realize that um, as much as you want to be fast and succeed, it's just as valuable and important, if not more, to manage the downside, manage the days where, you're not on and things aren't going well. So, letting go is like a big topic that we cover, letting go from the attachment. You have to have the memory of, a goldfish is ideal. But, unfortunately, when you have the emotional attachment to your results or identify with your results, that can be challenging. Um, Take me back to that East West shootout, that first win you had. I personally am a vibe guy. Matter of fact, I don't know if you can see it, but it says the vibe mindset back there. So I created something called the vibe mindset because I am so about vibe. I think just the word vibe comes up all the time. You're like, oh yeah, the vibes are right. We just woke up and I just woke up and just felt like, hey, I'm in Minneapolis. Like for me, if I go to Minneapolis, I got some good stories from Minneapolis. I got good vibes there. I've had fun there. I've had some great stories, great restaurant. Like everything about Minneapolis to me is thumbs up. So if I go to a Minneapolis Supercross and I'm with an athlete, they're going to feel that vibe because there's things called mirror neurons, and you can just when someone's vibe is on or someone's off, you
Yeah.
just feel it, right?
Yeah.
Um, Give me an idea. So I'm a vibe guy. What kind of guy are you? And also more specifically to that win, what was the vibe and energy, and what was the key if you go back to that success that you had? And I'm talking like maybe even bringing it back as early as maybe the days before you left for that event, or even the morning of. Maybe give me a little bit of an idea of what led up to it.
So the vibe in Salt Lake was kind of it wasn't crazy, but it was high energy, right? Because we were going into Salt Lake, and Eli Tomac, who's our 450 teammate, had just won the 450 championship the week before. So, he was doing all the stuff, whether it was revving the bike or doing burnouts. So we were all super excited, and obviously our my 250 teammate Christian Craig had the points lead. So we were honestly going into that weekend, and we were like, dude, we got to back that up. Like those guys had so much fun last weekend. We had so much fun last weekend underneath the truck, partying with fans, like doing that kind of stuff. We want that this weekend. So we went in there and like the main focus was just getting Christian like through the main event and making sure that we had at least another blue bike in front of whoever was second place in the championship. So like I could just tell with Nate that day that he was just different. You know what I mean? He came out and he was like firing. He did what he's did really well in practice, like, and to me, Nate is most dangerous when he's like quiet and confident. So we went into that main event after a good heat race, and Nate was just like, he's like, I could get this tonight, and I was like, all right, dude, like, you got it. So we go out there, and I'm next to Christian's mechanic, Brent Duffy, and we're just focused on Christian, and then Nate like goes for a hard pass on Christian and Hunter at the same time. So like Brent's looking at me, and I'm just like, dude, I don't know, like I'm just trusting Nate right now. So then after that on the headset, Bobby comes on the radio and he's like, Thrasher's got to go. Like, we've got to get Thrasher going. So I just like tell Nate on the pit board, I'm like, you just got to push and focus forward. So he's leading the whole thing, and Hunter, like, they're starting to yo yo. And I remember, like, I was like, dude, this is like, he was leading and the white flag came out. And I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like, I'm about to win my first race. Nate's about to win this thing. So like I'm trying to do all the stuff. So like write something super cool on the pit board so it gets put on the commercial for next week or gets put on a YouTube video. And I'm watching it and Hunter's like reeling them in. And the last thing between me and the finish line is the whoops. And Nate did not have a huge lead. So I erased like all the cool stuff I had written and I just wrote push and me and I was hanging over the wall cheering him on. Brent was over the wall cheering him on, and we saw him like go through the whoops the last time, and then like I don't want to say I blacked out because I remember it, but he went over the finish line, and then next thing I know, like both hands and the pit board are in the air, and I'm just like, yeah. And then we like there's still a video I have saved on Instagram that Yamaha posted. Like we go over to the podium, and Brent and Christian had just won the championship, and Nate and I had just won the race. So Duff looks at me and he goes, holy, and then he starts, so he like, they had to bleep some stuff out, but we're hugging and we're freaking out. And then we turn around and me and Duff are like, I have my arm around Duff and we look and Christian and Nate are sitting next to each other on the triple face and they're revving their bikes and cheering. And we were just electric the whole rest of the time. Like Nate went up on the podium. It was so cool to see. Like it's so rewarding to see your guy on the podium with the goggles around his neck, champagne bottle in his hand. Like that's what we do it for. But so we're going down after the 450 main to take pictures on the podium and stuff. So me and Brent take our bikes from the technical inspection that they do after every race, and we go down to the stadium, and there's still fans hanging out. And Duff had Christian's son Jagger on the front of his bike, so I go down there and I see Jagger's revving Christian's bike. So I get there, and then like for me, the crowd erupts. So like I grab a handful of clutch and a handful of throttle and just rev Nate's bike, and there's all these fans cheering, freaking out. And then we go up on the podium and the guys are doing burnouts, and it was just a feeling you'd like, dude, you can't forget. Like you'll never forget that feeling. And it was to the point where we were so electric. We were like, dude, we want more of this. Like it's such a good feeling, and like it's undescribable. It's one of the best feelings in the world when when like you realize a bike that you built took this guy to a win, and the guy that you're with like is capable of that. It's crazy.
Oh, it's wild. And even listening to you tell the stories, like I got chills. Like you your clarity of the story was so crystal clear. I felt like I got sucked into your brain for a little bit and was there watching with you. So it's so powerful. Now, was there an event after that? Because what I'm very curious about is I've noticed that an athlete will have momentum, and it almost seems like, and I wish that Fowler Facts had a stat on this. If you have a breakout or have like a really strong finish the weekend before, I'm just wondering how much that influenced the next weekend. Was there an event that you had the following weekend, or I forget, or was that?
We had nope. So we had 2 weekends off, and then we started our outdoor series, motocross. So
That's
we
right.
had yep. So we had 2 weekends off, and then we went to Pala in California to go race nationals. So it's not like the momentum was lost, but it's a new series. It's a new event. It's a totally different style of event. Like so, it's not that the momentum's lost. It's just a different vibe. You know what I mean? Because you have all those guys that either didn't finish out Supercross or didn't race, and they're focused on the nationals. So it's like it's kind of hard in that aspect to keep the momentum rolling. And last year at the beginning of the outdoors, we did have a little bit of bike struggles, like setting up the bike, but that was just because we were so laser focused on Supercross all the way until the very end.
Yeah, you know what's interesting too, and it's funny. I sometimes like to challenge narratives and challenge beliefs because I feel like beliefs and narratives, it's very easy to buy into them. So if I challenged you and said, okay, so the suspension's different, supercross versus motocross, but the principles and the process are somewhat similar. Break down the track, braking, acceleration, suspension setup, athlete being prepared physically, emotionally, mentally, um, adjusting and being adaptable. Is it, if I was to challenge you, is it really that different? Like, are we all buying into the narrative? Because, and I certainly am. You're not alone with your narrative. I mean, this is the narrative that everyone in the industry has. You hear it every season. Like, oh yeah, we got to train, we got to prep. And I'm just wondering, are people just buying into a belief in a narrative, acting in alignment with it? In when in reality, maybe there's a little bit. I'm not saying it's 100% on the one I just proposed, but could you see that maybe it's not as big of a difference as people think, and maybe that we're giving it too much credibility and making it too big of a thing, that transition?
So coming from the mechanic side, like we changed so much,
Oh,
and forgive me because I can't remember who said it, but Supercross is boxing. The lights are on. It's an art form. It's a science. There's a technique. There's all this stuff, and then you get to outdoors, and that's a barroom fight. Like you get to outdoors, and dudes are slugging it out for 35 minutes. Like you don't have to be as precise. You can kind of be a little bit more wide open and kind of that kind of stuff. So as much as you're going to have a professional boxer that can hold his own in a barroom fight, like Eli Tomac did. He won both championships last year because it's the same concept, but it's a little bit different. So we definitely understand that it's sometimes difficult for guys to transition between the two, and the gap is honestly growing, if nothing else. But it is the same concept, so you can have dudes that are coming off cloud nine and they're ready for a brawl and they'll take it straight to outdoors. But at the same time, you have some guys that whether it's the heat, whether it's the track being so wide open, whether it's the ruts being so deep, it's it's a mental and physical strain compared to Supercross.
oh, for sure. Yeah. And so in the times where you've worked with athletes, and not just Nate, but just athletes in general, I know it's been years. What do you see as being the biggest mental challenge? Because as a mental performance coach, I feel that I'm certainly biased. I look at a race through a different lens. I look at it through that mental performance lens. And I'm, even when I am listening to post race interviews, press conferences, I'm looking for body language. I'm looking for tone. I'm looking for words, narratives, the beliefs that support them. I mean, I go deep dive, especially with the athletes that I work with. You know, I mean, even today, I would say out of the athletes I worked with, I would say I sent 3 clips from press conferences in different sports, because I work with athletes in different sports. I think 2 were so there was one that was basketball, one golf, and one moto. And you just, the mental side is huge. What do you see as the biggest mental struggle in motocross, supercross, and how many people do you think actually address it, or how many people just say, "Send it, race through it,
Mm.
ride through it, you'll figure it out"?
So as far as that side of it, I'm the only part I can speak on is my interaction with the athletes that I've worked with. And honestly, it's super big. Like, the majority of the athletes I've worked with do have mental coaches, right? And whatever they talk about behind closed doors is between them. I know my biggest thing is just making sure that we're confident, right? Because I think there's a difference between confidence and cockiness. And it's super important for me that like if I'm sending Nate out there, I want him to be confident. I don't want him to be cocky. I don't want him to think like, oh, dude, like I don't have to be on my stuff and make a mistake. Like, and I could be totally wrong, and I'm just getting a wrong vibe from Nate. But for me, I always just try and keep him, and I say it all the time to him, calm and confident. Like, dude, you know what you're doing. You know where you belong. You know that you're gonna be up front there, and that's where I feel that Nate and I succeed. Like I think it's super hard for a lot of guys to get that confidence going right away, whether they've had a bad weekend before or there's a little nagging injury or, there was something that was bugging them in practice or something that was bugging them with the bike. Like some of that stuff, like you just try and kind of push your guy over because like you're not going to have a 100% motorcycle underneath you, but if we can get the setup to 95, 98%, and you know exactly what it's going to do on that track, dude, trust your bike, trust yourself. Let's go do this thing. Like, I think for me that's the The biggest challenge I see is just trying to keep the guy 2 feet in front of me on the motorcycle confident.
So what do you think inspires confidence then?
I think definitely confidence is inspired 100% by trust. Like from what I've seen, if at at first, with being new with Nate, I don't think the confidence was there right away. Like in preseason training that first year, like I don't know if it was me just trying to rush things along or whatever, but I got the vibe that I kind of had to tone it down and I had to dial it back. And maybe it was that Nate, didn't know who I was, didn't know my personality, and didn't necessarily know the quality of my work yet. But now that I have been told by Nate and his fiance that they trust me, and I can feel that with Nate, and I think that that's what breeds confidence. If nothing else, Nate knows that I have his back, and Nate knows that I'm going to do everything I can with the people around me to make sure that that motorcycle is the best it can be for him. And when he has that trust in myself, in his program, in his trainer, that's when I think that these dudes are on on point.
Yeah, and it's so true because if you think about it, trust aligns with the word belief. And obviously, you need to believe in yourself. And belief is having a trust because trust oftentimes is almost like blind faith, right? You go to a track, it's like any race you go to, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, any event, you could start off great, not finish well, the bike could perform well, but then it could blow up at the last lap. I mean, we've seen so many wild things happen not just in motocross, supercross, but in motorsports in general. And it's interesting, because you're right, trust is huge. But the thing is there's a function of time associated with trust, right? And so it's interesting how for you to come in, if you really think about it, and it could work both ways, right? Like, let's say, for example, you were working with Michael Alessi, who is an expert in starts. Like he was always getting hole shots, right? I think that if someone were to be trained, let's say I said I was an expert in, I could get people hole shots, be like, well, I'm not really sure, not really familiar with the name when it comes to hole shots. There'd be like a lag. Even if I had the exact same information, like let's say like Mike Alessi was talking in my ear and all I was doing was delivering the same exact words, same techniques, everything's the same. I think that there would be a lag in how quickly that athlete would get better at starts. However, if it were Mike physically in front of someone saying the exact same words in the exact same tone, the exact same order and way, I think that people just have this blind faith and trust because he's done it that they would automatically, probably same day, get faster in the starts. What are your thoughts? Agree or disagree?
No, I 100% agree. Like, dude, obviously being in the amateur scene, there's a lot of really smart coaches, there's a lot of really smart dads, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And you can have an amateur kid whose dad tells him the same thing 100 times over and he's not going to listen. But if a former pro or a different coach says it to him, he does it right away. Like, so there are times where, like if the wrong people are saying the right things, it doesn't necessarily always resonate. Where you need to have the people that you trust and the people that you have confidence in saying those things to you and realize that, that they're being honest with you and that they're not just saying something to fluff you or they're not just saying something because they think it's the right thing. Like, I think it goes back to, you would trust Michael Alessi to know how to pull a hole shot. Like,
No, it's true. And so, what's interesting too, and I couldn't wait to ask you this question. I My opinion on suspension is that a lot of us chase settings. I used to compete. I used to do more motocross racing cars, but I'd say my most success was in supermoto. So in supermoto, a lot of it's road racing, and yes, there is some dirt, but a lot of it's the suspension and that setup. And so sometimes you catch yourself blaming the tires, the tire pressure, the gearing. You're blaming the bike when in actuality if you have that one person who's being, who you trust, who's honest with you, they'll be like, hey man, I'll be honest with you. It's not the bike. It's you. I can see it. I'm watching you and I can see it with my own eyes. How do you manage the relationship between with specifically suspension bike? You can even call it bike setup, but it seems like it's more suspension. How do you manage that piece of the puzzle? Because there has to be a point where that fine line between you want your athlete to be confident in the suspension, the setup they have so they can perform at their best because they trust the bike, they trust you and the setup. But then there's also times where I think an athlete might get too nerved up. And my theory is always if you go into a little bit of a fight or flight, you grip the bars a little bit harder. I would assume that the bike is going to feel different and perform different if you've got a different level of intensity on the grip. I mean, if you go 20, 30, we'll call it 20% more grip because you're in that kind of fight or flight, or you're maybe a little agitated or frustrated, what have you. I just can't see how you wouldn't feel that the bike feels different. How do you manage suspension changes with regards to that? Like, because what if you make a change in the wrong direction? Now you've made it worse.
No, so for sure, making suspension changes is probably the hardest thing because you can collect all the data you want and you can run it on a suspension dyno for 8 hours. You could simulate races on a suspension dyno, and that's not going to translate 100% to what you're going to feel on the track. Whether it's the rider feeling a certain way, the rider thinking a certain way, the thoughts they have in their head, like there's nothing in the world that replaces you trusting your suspension technician. And luckily, we have two great suspension technicians at Starr, and Nate trusts them 100%. So Nate will come over to me, and if he does have a frustration or a complaint about the motorcycle, he says that to me. And then my job is to make sure that either I relay that 100% how he said it, or that we get a suspension tech within earshot as soon as possible, so that way he can relay to them what he's feeling, and they can make the changes, and he'll have 100% trust in them. And 100% we've made changes the wrong direction. Like, you're never going to learn if you never go the wrong direction. So we've done stuff to Nate's bike where like we think it will be better here, but it's way worse in a different spot. It's a little bit better in the corners, but it's way worse in the whoops. And it's just trying to find that balance and trying to find the spot where, again, where Nate trusts his motorcycle, where he knows exactly what that thing's going to do. He knows, hey, if I hit this line, my rear end's going to kick this way, but that's fine. Where if we try and absorb that kick, well, then what's it going to do over in turn three, or what's it going to do at the end of rhythm number one? It's hard, but that's why I think, and I think the philosophy around us is like, look, the bike's never going to be 100%. We'll get you to 90%, but the rest, that 10% is you trusting it and you understanding what it's going to do. And that's on you, bud. Like, I can't make a change just because you're sliding out in this one corner. Because if I do that, well, dude, now you kind of suck in the whoops. It's trying to find that line. It's like, it's hard. And that's why we say, 90% motorcycles are winning motorcycles. Like, if you get them there, then that's on them. There's no reason for them not to trust their motorcycle, not to understand exactly what it's going to do on every inch of that track.
I love that. You know, it's funny. I've never heard that saying 90% motorcycle is a winning motorcycle. That's actually, that truly resonates. And you know, it's interesting. You talk about that balance between cornering setups versus whoop setups. When you guys make a change or a decision based on that issue, the concern. So just to give a little clarity, if you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not the mechanic. You make the suspension so that you can turn faster and get in and out of turns better. Oftentimes, the cost of doing that is you don't carry as much momentum through the whoops. Like, how would you phrase that? Like, what's the dynamic between the two, and how are you actually making those decisions? Is it just feel, or do you guys actually have data where you're looking at the data and you're like, well, the numbers say what to do?
So with us, with Star Racing, the majority of our stuff is off of the rider's feel, because if we were to mess around with data, sometimes you can just kind of spin your own wheels because, like I said, you could try anything on the dyno, but it's not going to directly correlate. Like, so the biggest thing is I'll get feedback from Nate, or he'll provide feedback to the suspension technicians, and they'll make the change, whether it's balance or valving. But a lot of times when you do get a bike that's really good in the corners, it's just like a little bit what we would call front end bias, or it's a little soft in the front to get it to kind of knife into those corners. And a lot of times that would take away from the whoops, just because you look at someone like James Stewart, where he ran telephone poles for forks. Like, those things were so stiff because he could just make it corner, and then he could hit the whoops at 100 miles an hour because his front end is just going to bounce off the top of every single one. And it is a balance thing. And I would say that those two might be the most opposing factors on a track, but it's gonna change everywhere if you make the slightest change. Like if we change, like say Nate's like his shock preload, that might help it in one part of the track, but it's gonna hurt it somewhere else. So it really just all is what the rider is confident with. Because you have someone like Eli Tomac who, in my opinion, might have a little bit more of like a front end bias looking motorcycle, but he could still shred a set of whoops.
Oh yeah, he can definitely shred.
Yeah.
For sure. He's basically a legend in sport. For those of you not familiar with motocross, supercross, he's becoming or already is essentially a legend in our sport, but is still active. So we're all curious as to how far that legendary status will grow and go. And it seems like there's as close as we think we are to the end is a reminder that maybe we're not.
Yeah.
So bring me to your background in sport. I looked you up, saw that you got some laps in at Winchester. You also grew up in Higganum, which is
Mhm.
not too far down the street from me myself. Just kind of want to know what led you to where you are now.
So what led me to where I am now is I had a school nurse for a mom. So that meant I wanted to do every single dangerous thing I could ever think of, and she shut most of them down. So growing up, I did play stick and ball sports. I played like a lot of football. I was pretty good at football, and I did track. But honestly, what always drew me in was what like when I was little was watching Travis Pastrana on TV. Like that always caught my attention. And then the moment MX versus ATV came out, I got my hands on it as soon as I could. And like my mom was always like, no, dirt bikes are too dangerous. So she got me a quad of all things. So when I was little, I had like a little 90cc quad. And then finally one day, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I jumped on my cousin's dirt bike. And then I don't know, like a couple weeks later, I had one sitting in my garage. So I really got into dirt bikes at that point, and it was a super good outlet for me. Like it kept my head on straight. I loved dirt bikes. I loved moto. I loved wanting to be better. Like, dude, I was a C class guy, so getting better was a struggle for me, and it kept me going. Like, it was hard, but motocross was the only thing that I could do that wasn't a team sport, right? And it was all about me and I could how good I could be on a bike and how you know, I always wanted the next bike. I always wanted to have better bikes. I always wanted to be better riding. So it really helped me strive to work on myself, and I just fell in love with it from the first day, and it brought me here.
Yeah. No, you know what's interesting? What do you think it is? Because the people that are passionate about motorcycles and passionate about bikes, it's really deep. And I have my theories, but I'd love to hear yours. What do you think it is about being in a motorcycle? And I'm not just talking in competition. I'm just talking in general, whether it's ripping through the woods, ripping down to the, I don't know, down to your friend's house 4 miles away on an 85-degree day, clear and sunny. What do you think it is about being on a motorcycle that gets so many of us hooked at an early age?
Well, I hate to use the same cliche, but it's the freedom, right? Like I grew up in Higganum. That's a farm town with really nothing in it. So my dirt bike, I could pull out of my garage and ride over to my buddy's house, and then we'd fuel up there, and then we'd ride on the power lines or on the state forest. Like it was just that freedom before I ever had a license. Like, and it was the most fun thing I could do with my buddies. Like, if we could go find a sand pit, or if we could go find like a hill climb or some new place on the power lines, it was just the thing that we love to do, and that's what drew me in, and I think that's what draws everyone in is like at a young age, you're 100% self-sufficient on that thing. It's a motorcycle. No one's on there with you. Like dad will tell you gas is on the right and your brakes here, here's your clutch and that kind of stuff. But once you leave arm's reach, like you're on your own champ and you got to figure it out. And I think for me, that was what was so drawing was just being free and being on my own and understanding that I was in complete control of this thing.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm with you that, team sports, it's like, I don't want to be associated. And certainly you're on a motocross, supercross team, but it's different. We're talking right now, just motorcycles one on one, and it is great because like I don't I even struggle, like the guys on team sports. It's like, well, what if you perform at your best and they don't? You get punished for it. That's like to me, me paying the same amount of taxes as the guy down the street who's paying nothing. I kind of like, rah, 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 like I'm paying for all the potholes, so you have to go through them. I get to go around them or I don't know, whatever. But it just doesn't seem fair. So interesting stuff. Yeah, and it does seem like it's funny. Years ago, I used to be on Facebook, which I think I'm on it still, but I don't log in. But I remember that I just one day went riding and I was like super emotional because I think that something was challenging me. I know that's why I wrote. I don't remember what it was, but I know that something really got me bent that day. And I just remember getting home and all I cared about is like I'm putting my brand new Fox gear on. It was like one of the cool colorways they had, and I had it. I was like, oh, this stuff's good. I'm like, I'm ripping, I'm going, and I just hammered. I have a little track. I have a sand pit. I actually own a sand pit. So got a gravel pit in the back of my house, which is pretty convenient. Got a state forest on the other side. And, it's unlimited riding where I am. I mean, I basically live almost like at my own personal compound. And so I just remember ripping and coming back and I didn't even feel like I was the same person. And I actually just got on a video and I just recorded a video, and it was like literally, I have no Facebook followers. I had like millions of views because, and that was all I talked about was how my mind was caught up in the vortex of what happened and what shouldn't have happened. And this wasn't fair. And, this whole thing. But the second the helmet goes on, the goggles went on, it's like that mental break of the vortex. I call it the vortex, where you keep thinking negative things, then more negativity comes in, and then more, and then more, and then more, and more. Well, you can't have a vortex when I'm trying to figure out how to land a little bit cleaner on the downside of this jump and how to get through the turn a little bit quicker, and wondering if I have a little bit more lean angle left. And who knows, maybe I'm even running a stopwatch and I want to see what my times are. It was just funny. Like, you're so focused on getting better and what you want to do. At least for me, I'm more of like the competitive type. Like if I get on a bike, I can't just ride and be like, oh, let's go for a ride. I'm like, unfortunately, I can't do that. But it frees your mind. You come back and it's like, it's almost like therapy, right? I mean, they call it what? Throttle therapy, right?
Mm. Yeah, they do
So,
call it they do call it child therapy. I think that was one of my Instagram captions when I was like 18 or something. It's one of those funny things. But yeah, for sure. Honestly, you you kind of can't be worried about what's going on when you're riding a dirt bike or when you're riding a motorcycle. Like all of the other stuff in your life just kind of shuts off for a little bit. And I think that's what is so drawing. You're not really worried about anyone outside of arm's reach. Like if you're on a motorcycle, you're worried about the dudes around you and that's it. And like for me, it's like even now as a mechanic, when I'm at a race, I'm not on my phone. I'm not worried about what's going on. Like I'm not worried about anything besides what's right in front of me, like my motorcycle and making sure that I do the best I can for Nate. So it's super healthy for me, and it's something that, as a 26-year-old person, like, dude, you got to work on. Like, I so now value the races as just like that point where I'm not on my phone. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm worried about the race. And that's what still draws me to riding. Like when we have days where like as mechanics we go out riding, which is few and far between, but we still make time for that because you're worried about the dudes around you and it's such a good bonding experience and it's like the a dirt bike is probably the easiest way to only focus on one thing because if you pull focus while you're on a dirt bike, you're going down, dude, and then you have more stuff to worry about than you did before because now you're hurt. So,
that is so true. Yeah, it's a state of hyper focus. And to be honest with you, I think that we don't realize it, but you're basically you enter a lot of times into a flow state.
yeah, well, and I think it's because you really are like dealing with so much information, like not information, but so much like stimuli coming at you, and it's honestly super stressful. You know what I mean? Like you got to worry about, hey, does this rut I just pick have a kicker at the top of that thing? Like you're worried about so much in that time that you don't have to think about anything else. Like, I think it's super helpful for everyone to just have something in their life where they can just kind of worry about just that for, whether it's a 4 lap moto or whether it's an afternoon with your buddies, like you're just worried about that. You're not worried about what's going on. You're not worried about anything else.
It's so true. And, want to bring it back to competition for a moment. I have a couple theories. One theory that I think is interesting because I tried to disprove it. I think a lot of times if I have a belief or a theory, I don't look always just for validation because that's what most people do and it's easy. And you can filter out anything that doesn't align with your belief and your narrative. And so you only see the evidence to support it, but you miss the evidence to challenge it. And so a lot of times I challenge my beliefs. And one of the beliefs I challenged recently is I've watched some of these races in my mind, and I want to hear your opinion on this. I believe that in our sport, motocross, supercross, there is a level of, even though you might be my competitor and I might not be friends with you, I might not like you, you know, but at the same time, if I'm a 10th place guy and you're like on the podium every weekend, I feel that there are a lot of athletes that, especially when it comes to the whole shot, they will already in their mind create the race and they will make the mistake of competing in alignment with a predicted outcome. In other words, hey, didn't really feel too fast in practice, didn't have the best qualifier, not feeling comfortable on the bike, which obviously we know the word comfort is almost like a prerequisite to success in our sport. And it's interesting because not a lot of people talk about comfort. I do all the time with my athletes, but not enough people break down comfort because you realize that is the condition that most people have in order to succeed. But I noticed that a lot of guys, I feel, will not be as aggressive out of the gate at the start because they already feel that they know where they are in the pecking order. Agree or disagree?
Um, I definitely see that. You know what I mean? Like, and I agree with most guys, but you still have those guys that have like almost delusions of grandeur where they're like, dude, I'm gonna get this start. And it's kind of like, okay, like if you want, but we'll see you at the end of 3 laps. But yeah, for sure, there definitely is. There's not really a hierarchy, but there are times where there are guys that, are borderline main event guys or top 10 guys where they just kind of fall into the beds they've made, right? So these dudes, a lot of them, they focus on the LCQ, and then once they're in the main, they're like, cool, I'm in the main. And then they like shut off early at the Starr or they do whatever. And that's up to them, right? Like, I feel like if you are thinking something so hard, like you're gonna manifest it. Like, so those dudes that are just thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get tired, oh, I'm gonna get arm pump or whatever, like that stuff's gonna happen. Where if you have a good mindset, and I feel like if you're confident, like stuff's gonna go well. Like, even this past weekend, Nate and I came to Daytona. And Daytona is a super speedway race, a super speedway supercross race. So it's a little bit more open. The track's a little bit narrower. It's a little bit different than your traditional stadium supercross. And that was a lot of confidence for Nate and I. Is like, hey man, this is your kind of track. And he went out there and he crushed everything he could this weekend, right? Obviously, didn't have the result in the main event that he wanted, but at the end of the day, I think that just snowballed from something that wasn't his fault. But on the flip side of that, I think you have those guys that are just like they don't necessarily know where they fit in, and it just leads to whether it's bad results or lack of success or anything like that. So I think it's just over kind of getting that imposter syndrome and just realizing you're where you need to be and you could definitely succeed and you could do a lot of stuff that you thought was impossible as a person. I know in my life I've done a lot of stuff that was impossible. Like, dude, if I told 13-year-old me that I'd won a supercross as a factory mechanic, he would freak out right now. Like, it's gnarly.
God, isn't that so true? And, that's actually a really good exercise is to look back, because sometimes, it's so easy to put pressure on yourself, right? Like, oh, this should have happened, that should have happened. But when you do that exercise, I love that you did that and you recognize that the value of that it's like, wow, the 13-year-old would never in a million years imagine that I would be where I am now. But yet the modern day me, the now me, is not being so kind. But yet look at the 13-year-old me over there who literally is jumping up and down to the point where it's just like you see he doesn't even he's in a different world, his mind is just blown. So it's an interesting exercise, and it's interesting that you recognize imposter syndrome. What's interesting, do you feel that when so your athlete, just so you know, there's different types of tracks, and your athlete is definitely fast, amazing, and is capable of anything he wishes. However, he's definitely been identified and labeled as someone who is definitely going to be most likely at the lead on some of these tracks. Do you think that the belief came first? Because it's interesting. It's like, is he believing that he's good on these tracks and that in of itself is feeding the result? Or is there something that he really does all that different that you could watch film on and be like, oh, look what Nate just did. No one else is doing that. Where do you feel the difference between, belief? Where do you feel belief comes in? Is it the prerequisite and it comes first? Like, how does that all factor in? If you know how I'm asking that question, I feel like I didn't
Right.
deliver it the best.
No, you're good. So the kind of way that I interpreted that was, do the results come first or does the belief come first?
Correct.
And
Yes.
for
Dude, can we swap places?
yeah, no, you're good. You're good. But honestly, if I'm going to be transparent, is like I wasn't there for Nate's first two races in Atlanta, his rookie year. So I wasn't there. So for me, I know that he has confidence from his results. Now, did he go into that night thinking, dude, I'm going to win this thing? I'm a rookie. I'm number 91. Like, I'm going to come out here. I'm going to crush it. I'm going to show all these dudes what's up. Or did the result just come? And I don't know, you know what I mean? Like when I'm watching it from a third party, like I was watching it as actually a competitor and I was like, dude, Nate's in the LCQ, like what's going on? But he comes out of the LCQ and crushes it. So in my head, I got to think that Nate's confidence came first because like you go to the LCQ and you win the LCQ, like that's cool, but that's not the result you want to have on a night. So I think it's a lot of confidence. I know some dudes, it's really hard to build confidence, but I think that once you get the ball rolling, it's super easy to keep it rolling, but it's just as easy to stop it. So I think it's super important to continue to have that confidence and realize that if, for me, it's like if you realize if you're just going to be able to do this and you're going to have the confidence to do this, like do everything you can, and eventually it will come, and you'll be looking back at the results like I knew I could do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in listening to you describe confidence, how it can come just as easily as it goes. The thing that I think about when you say that is that if you attach your results to your confidence, then exactly what you said is true. If I win one weekend, I'm confident. If I don't win the next, I'm not. And then you start to see these athletes with these roller coaster of emotions because they become a result. Their sense of self-worth is based on their points, based on their, you're only as good as your last race, which I certainly get the saying, but it's interesting because you start to realize that if your confidence is fed by your results, then yes, exactly what you said is true. However, if your process is, and that's why everyone tries to say that process is, more important than results, but sometimes you get some people a little resistant to it because it's a little cliche at this point. Trust the process. People kind of, I'm even myself not a big fan of that phrase because
Yeah.
it doesn't go into enough detail for people to really recognize the value of what we're really talking about. And that is that if my program, my preparation, my mental, emotional, my physical, my team, my mechanic, my suspension guy, like if I have all of that and I lose, well, I still have the same core. My core hasn't changed. Who I am hasn't changed. And I still would expect in my mind to be able to perform at a really high level, even if my last race weekend maybe wasn't ideal. Do you think that athletes sometimes identify too much with the results?
Yeah, for sure. Like, and that's one thing like I know I focus on with Nate is like you're in the industry, your results do define you, but at the end of the day, dude, like you got to look at all the other external forces that affected your results, right? So a lot of times, and I'm not trying to pass the blame, I'm not trying to like just fluff my guy up, but a lot of times it's not your fault, dude. Like you did everything you could, and that's what you have to take away from it. You have to understand that you can only put in all the hard work you can, all the time you can, all the effort you can. If something happens, like say if Nate has a bike break or if Nate gets taken down by somebody or Nate has a crash, it's like, dude, that's not your fault. Like you did everything you could do. And that's what I try to focus on with my guys is like if you give me 100% effort, that's all I can ask of you. And I'll tell you what, out of all the people I've worked with, out of all the dudes I think in the sport, Nate has the most heart out of anyone. And I never have to ask that guy for more effort. And to me, that is just the best thing because it's like I trust his effort. I know that that dude is going to put the laps in, is going to put the reps in, and that's what leads to his results. And that's why it takes nothing for me to be on the line building his confidence that hopefully he already has inside. But I build it because I trust the work that he's put in. At the end of the day, whether or not he does, that's on him. But I do, so I'm going to try and help him with his confidence the best I can.
Yeah, I love that. No, I like the way you speak. Dude, your background and the way that you analyze the mind, all that, have you spent time researching like the mental side? Because like you definitely use some phrases and you speak in some ways where I'm like, you've read some books or watched some YouTube or I don't know. There's something you're doing. What exactly is it?
So, in all honesty, like when I was in high school and stuff, trying to get the best performance out of myself, I did spend time in therapy, and I think it's super important to be introspective and to understand like you're the only thing in this world that you can control, and that's something that I've had to come to grips with because, like I said, when I was little, I always wanted to have that control of whether it was football or something. It's like it's your effort is really the only thing that you can control, and yourself is the only thing that you can control. So you can affect only so much in this life, and the rest of it's just going to come at you, and you got to roll with it.
That is so true. I love that you knew that at an early age. And it's funny. I have an amateur program where I have a couple 10-year-olds, and one of the exercises we do, I actually, if you want to come in, I should have you be a guest speaker this coming Monday. It's a small group. And it's a really a group that would really probably appreciate your time. But we've got two 10-year-olds. And they are spicy. They are
Yeah.
really good kids. They are so funny. So what we'll do is on Mondays, we will listen to interviews of some of the athletes post-race press conferences. And I will play a little clip or also Swap Moto Live, who does the How Was Your Weekend, which is also oftentimes even better. And it's so funny. I will actually, and these are people that have been in my group training program for a while now, because I have a group training program and then I have my one-on-one. And so I have these 10-year-olds where if you were to listen in, I go, hey, listen, we just we just listened to Chase Sexton talk for the last 2 minutes. Palmer, Chase is in front of you right now. Just finished with this interview. Give him some advice. He's like, all right, listen. And it's like, I think he just starts going into it. And it is hilarious. And then we have a 10-year-old giving Chase Sexton advice that is literally fundamentally very sound, great, solid. And I'm like, would it be inappropriate to take this
10-year-old, yeah. Yeah. Send
I'd
them
be
out there.
blocked for life. I'd probably,
Right.
wouldn't even be able to buy a Honda Civic. It would probably go that deep, where my name would be blacklisted. But really interesting that you, and what gave me the inspiration to share that with you is just getting those mental skills dialed early. Think about how much that influenced where you are now. Probably has influenced the success of your relationship with not just your girlfriend, but obviously with other teammates. Because what's interesting that people don't realize is you're at a facility where you've got, I mean, I don't know, the math better than I do, maybe 6 guys, 5, 6, 7 guys, whatever it is, that are all competing, not always in the same class, but many who are. And there's that desire to compete, but then yet here you are, it's not even race weekend yet, and you're looking around and you know exactly where you stand. You know that I'm here, he's there, and he's there, and this is where I'm at. And it's so interesting to me, the fact that this relation the dynamics of the relationship between all the athletes, the parents, the coaches, the mechanics being managed. It's just so fascinating to me. One question that I had was, there is a family by the last name of Deegan's, which you probably hear about it so much. That's why I'm only asking one question, so don't worry. But I am very, very pro Deegan, not because I'm a fanboy, but because I pay very, very close attention to the way that his father speaks to him. And I've also paid very close attention to the way his son speaks in interviews. And there's things that I hear and that I pick up that I know as a mental performance coach are definitely factoring into his success. What do you feel factors into that family in particular success?
So I met Brian and Hayden when I lived in California before I even worked with Starr. And from the beginning, I could tell, like, dude, this kid, like, people always want to say he's had everything that he could ever dream of given to him on a silver spoon. And it's like, he hasn't. Because that kid understands that the effort he puts in is exactly what he's going to get out. So there'll be days where Hayden just he wants to do more laps and his trainer has to tell him no, or he wants to go riding on a day that's a rest day, or he wants to do this or that, and all of it comes from a good place of just the family understanding that they need to and they want to do everything they can to help Hayden succeed. So that's why, like, yeah, people always are wanting to hate on the Deacons or whatever, or anything, but if you met those people in person and there was no fans around, no cameras around, nothing, you are hard pressed to find someone that doesn't like them because they honestly are genuine people who may look like they have the glitz and the glamour, but they're still hardworking people. Like Brian still goes out and races. Hayden works his butt off week in and week out. And they're a good, genuine family. And they're pretty great to be around sometimes.
Yeah, and it's funny. I met Brian in person at Redbud at like midnight
Yeah.
in at the where they had the pit bike race, and just started talking. And what you said, I corroborate that story for sure. He was super kind, super nice. I'm like, wow, this is great. And it's just no surprise. You start to see that, the parents, when a parent has a successful relationship, a successful career themselves, has kids that are quote unquote successful, whatever that means, competing at a high level in motorsports, let's call it. It's by design, it's certainly not by chance. Now, what's also interesting is they're a very dynamic, active, social media driven family. Then you've got this other family, the Tomacs. You got John Tomac, who is a former mountain bike champion, very intense still. Definitely, winning is in his blood. I haven't I've talked to John, but I haven't met his Eli's mom. But you've got a family who's completely on the other spectrum of not so much engaging in social, don't have their own channels trying to promote themselves, much more a different personality. Um, how do you view the difference between like the Deegan success and Tomac success? What are the things that you've noticed as contrasting, but also maybe some things that are the same, that have led to both of their families succeed in what you've seen?
So my experience with the Tomac family is fairly limited. Like we've obviously had Johnny T, John Tomac, Eli's dad is there at every race, and he's super involved with the 450 team, which I think is important. But I personally am not involved with the 450 team, so I can't speak on that. But I know from the interactions that I've had with Eli, like he still is a normal guy, and he likes to joke around. He likes to laugh. Like he came out for the photo shoot and he was telling us all about this Porsche day that he had at one of some road track in the car, and he was showing us videos of him racing this Porsche around, and he was telling us all about it, and he's a normal guy. He'll talk about his dogs. He'll talk about his all the stuff that he does, like, yes, behind closed doors, but that's his personal life. And I think it's different because the Tomacs, I feel like, are still extremely successful, but maybe they're not on YouTube and maybe they're not doing those things, and that's their right not to be, but they're still crushing it and they're still great people to be around. Like, even Eli's mom, she was the one handing me my credential my first year as a mechanic. Like, I'd go see her every weekend and she'd give me a wristband and she'd sign me in, and uh, it was they're good people, and you know.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. It's funny. I didn't even realize that. She probably gave me my credentials when I was going to more of the events. That's good. And I probably didn't even know it, you
Yeah,
know?
well, and that's the thing though, that they're unassuming, right? They're there to work. They're not the people that are in the spotlight, and they don't have to be. That's not asked of them. Like, they've given us one of the greatest people to swing a leg over a dirt bike. So I think they've done their part.
It's true. And you realize that, and you start to realize that some of the best athletes in the world are super normal people with just super abnormal results and lifestyles, or even not even lifestyle, just abnormal results,
No,
It might, that's it.
that's one thing I think is, like, you look at all these people and you look at these successful motocross athletes and supercross athletes, and they're normal people. Like, yeah, they do superhero stuff on a dirt bike, but at the end of the day, like, they still like to have fun. They still like to joke around. Like, we're all normal people. It's just a matter of what you do on a dirt bike or what you do in life.
It's so true. Just want to ask you one last question because I think it's fascinating and it's someone that I don't have a lot of knowledge of. Um, so I would assume I know that you have like your direct, the people you directly respond to as far as your bosses go, but then you have like the team owner. What's his
Mm,
name?
Bobby Reagan.
Bobby Reagan.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if it was Regan or Reagan. That's why I had you say it. So Bobby Reagan, I've never I haven't searched, but I haven't bumped into a video of him, haven't bumped into an interview. If he walked right in front of me, wouldn't know it was him. What I'm curious is to what about him, because you start to realize that, almost like if you were to break down what I've seen from the outside of your team and the people you work with, it's just a game player, me getting to know you better, a game player, like your a game, your athletes a game. It's like, don't see many B's. It's almost like, geez, uh, it's all A game players. What if we go right to the top? What is it about the owner, Bobby, at the top? Because there has to be a certain level of respect we give him because he is at the top of that. If you look down at like a pyramid, he's at the top. And everyone that gets hired, I would assume, he has some degree of say to it, or at least his direct reports do. What is it about this mystery man to me that makes his team so successful? I mean,
So,
he's he's killing it.
yeah. Bobby he's probably the most unassuming successful team owner that you'd ever meet. He's from Wiggins, Mississippi. He's got a southern draw. He's a tall dude. He has a mullet, and like, he's honestly funny. And I mean, he has those moments where he's hard, but he grew up playing football. He was telling me the other week that he played at, I think it was LSU football way back in the day. And it's like, to see that guy have so much independent success on his own, whether it's being a car dealership owner or playing football or whatever he did, he just took a liking to motocross, and now that team is his family. And he lets us know it. Like, on Friday in Arlington, he's sitting there playing with a turkey call because that's what he does. Like, he'll be sitting there playing with a turkey call, and then Saturday night he'll be like yelling at us on the headset. And it's just funny because you realize it's like, no, this dude's just doing him, and we're all here. Like, he's great. He, like, yeah, there's always gonna be that stuff where it's like, dude, he's being harsh this week, or he's upset, but he's he wants us to succeed, and he'll tell us that, this is Star Racing Yamaha. We're here to win. We're here for like one thing and one thing only, and that's to put more plaques on that door. And like he lives by that, and you know he tries his best to breed a good feeling underneath the truck, because I think he really views us as kind of his family and his outlet, you know. So he is a mystery man, but I think that's a little bit because he's not someone that's in the limelight. Like, I know he's done, I think, an interview with Whiskey Throttle where he talks about kind of his backstory and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, to us, that's Bob. He's the same guy that will roll up in a used Chevy Colorado that he drove to the race himself, and he'll pull up next to the tent and we'll go over and talk to him. But he's also the same guy that has $1 million semi riding down the road with professional motocross bikes on it. He's probably the most winningest team owner in the last 10 years in 250 Supercross and motocross. Like,
So
there's
wild.
really no way to describe him. It's just Bob.
Yeah, and once again, you see the theme of, he's just a normal guy who wants to get better at calling turkeys in so he could shoot more turkeys, and he just got, maybe a slightly abnormal life existence and income. And,
Yeah.
and what he does with his income is definitely not the norm. So, yeah, it's really wild stuff. Um Last question, I promise. Funniest on the headset conversation or thing said. There's got to be some, with the headsets. I've obviously been keyed into some of these headsets, and some of the conversations make sense. Sometimes people are saying things. I've even heard people banter and get in arguments. Anything funny or any good stories on the headset?
Every weekend, it's great stories on the headset. Like, we're always trying to have fun and we're trying to joke around, whether it's like pointing out something weird on someone's bike that we see or something going on. But like, top tier moment for me was my first ever Supercross with the team. Like, this was my first Supercross with the team. Bobby at the time really didn't know who I was. He always, and to this day, he still calls me Thrasher's mechanic on the headset. So it's A1. It's A1. We're sitting on the line, and he's on the headset, and he goes, "Hey, Thrasher's mechanic, I could see you on the jumbotron." And I turn and look, and it's just me and Nate on the jumbotron. Like, they zoomed in on Nate, and he's like, "I mean, you gotta smack that boy around a little bit. You gotta get him fired up. Tell him shake and bake." So like, I didn't know Nate super well at the time. Like, Nate and I were still kind of in those early stages. So I like pull my microphone away and I'm like, "Hey Nate, like, he's telling me to shake you up a little bit and slap you around." And Nate's like, "No." And I was like, "All right, he's telling me to tell you shake and bake." And he looks at me and he starts laughing and like taps his goggles and puts them on. And like, all time, that is one of the things I'll never forget. It's just sitting on the line and just hearing, "Hey, Thrasher's mechanic," and I look up and it's me on the jumbotron. I'm like, "Oh, dude, great."
Shake and bake. Yeah, if that
Yeah,
fires up your athlete, then you definitely have definitely a powerful effect.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my God, I love it. Great story. Great way to end things. If someone wants to reach out to you or follow you on social, how can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram at CT Kauffman. It's super easy. It's just my first two initials and my last name. Follow Nate, follow Star Racing Yamaha. Other than that, I'm not super active and I got to be better about it. I'm sorry, but otherwise, I'm just on Instagram.
Well, now you're on YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube too. Yeah. My first foray into podcasting. I've done the vlog thing. I'm still doing the vlog thing. Nate's got vlogs out, so look for me on there too. But
Oh, I'll have
otherwise,
to
my
check
first
those
foray
out.
into, yeah, they're pretty good. They're funny. We try and have a good
Dude,
time.
you should do more podcasts. You're a great interview. I'm being honest. You've
Thanks.
got a great delivery, a great way of sharing just interesting stories. I think I don't know, man. I think if you get sick of getting oil on your hands, you might want to grab yourself your own mic and your own camera and start, recording.
We'll see how it shakes down. I'm always down to talk. I know, like, the Yamaha media people, they never have a shortage of questions for me, so I get my fair bit of reps in.
Yeah, well, you know how to shake and bake, so it's all
Yeah.
good. But anyways, thank you so much for your time. Had a great time with you, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on, Jay. It was great. It was fun.